What I'm going to show you right now is how to build more urgency. Now, in the training modules, you've already seen a lot about consequence questions, and I just wanted to show you just a little bit more of a deeper dive in here so you start to really understand the psychology behind how I developed this and why it's so crucial for you, for your sales team, for your salespeople, your organization to really master this stage. Now, there are 3 reasons why we use consequence questions, right? Number 1, okay, is they are used, and they can be used throughout the conversations for this, is to seed doubt where the prospect starts to think that they might be making a mistake without them getting defensive, okay? So I will show you in different parts of a conversation a few different contexts where you can actually use consequence questions outside of the consequence stage, okay? And they're meant, like I said, to seed doubt that they might be making a mistake without the prospect getting defensive. This is the key, without them getting defensive. If they get defensive, the sales resistance, the wall comes up, hard to get them to let the guard down, okay? So we want to be careful on that. Number 2, this is a big reason. It gets them to defend themselves on why they feel they need to change their situation. So after you go through your solution awareness questions, after you find out the real situation, help them find out the real situation, you build a gap through problem awareness, you start to get them to see what the future looks like, okay, with solution awareness questions. We then want to we get them on that emotional high, okay, where they feel and see what that future looks like once these emotional needs are met, okay, once the problems are solved. We then want to rip that away from them where they start to defend themselves on why they need to change and do that now. What does that do? That builds massive urgency where they're telling themselves why they need to change now rather than you telling them why they should change now, which is going to be more persuasive. Obviously, when you get them to tell themselves, because when they tell themselves, it's true. When you tell them why they should do something as a salesperson, unless they're a laydown, they already know that you're biased, so it's not so true. You see the difference in that, okay? And number 3, we use them to get them to question their way of thinking of why they've allowed the problems to stay the same, or emotional needs. Let's say you're a marriage therapist and you're solving an emotional need, right? Maybe they don't feel loved by their spouse. Okay, you're solving a problem so they don't get divorced, but you're also solving emotional needs. Maybe you sell luxury cars, Lamborghinis, solving an emotional need, okay? So it just depends on what you're selling. But these 3 things, we have to really understand the psychology behind the stage, because if you don't understand the psychology, it's just like you've memorized a few questions and you're going to sound like a scripted robot. So you have to know the psychology. If you know the psychology, you can use consequence questions no matter what the situation, okay? No matter what's going on, depending on the context, okay? Obviously, we're not going to use consequence questions in the first 30 seconds of a conversation, because how much trust and credibility do you have at that point? Unlikely you have any at all, okay? All right, now remember, I just want to remind you this, we've gone through this in a lot of different trainings. What are the 2 biggest emotional drivers that causes a human being to want to change? It's pain and the fear of continuous or future pain. If we can't help them relive their pain of their current situation and maybe their past history, and then have a fear that that's going to continue, or even have a fear that that could happen in the future, your prospects are not going to feel much urgency to change. And when they don't feel any urgency to change, ultimately that's why they don't buy from you. That's why they give you tons of objections. That's why they procrastinate. Okay, you're starting to get that. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a few different industry-specific examples so you can see the structure of asking consequence questions, all right? Now we obviously dive into this far more advanced, far much more deeper, far much more industry specific in our advanced inner circle mastery programs. I'm just giving you a little bit here for this portal. Okay, you want to get advanced inner circle, just make sure you reach out to us. Okay? All right, now in this example, let's say that you're at the end of a conversation with a prospect, and it doesn't really matter what you're selling, and the prospect says something like this. Okay, I'm assuming most of you have had a prospect that said something like, hey, we really liked you, we really like what you went over, but right now is not a good time for us, keep in touch, we'll connect down the road, or something like that. Have you had that happen before? Or, hey, we really liked you in your presentation, but we decided to go with XYZ competitor. You ever get something like that? Well, what do you do at that point? Do you sit there and argue with them on why they're wrong, why they're making a mistake, and why they should do it now? How often does that really work? 1 or 2 out of 10 times, maybe? See, that's the numbers game approach, okay? So what I have to do, what's my first job anytime I get somebody that says they're not moving forward, is to find out the real reason why. Because this is probably not the real reason why, okay? That's just their story or limiting beliefs. And if you buy into the story, their story, you offer them no value, you don't help them at all because their problems stay the same and nothing ever changes for them. So I'm not gonna buy into their story. First of all though, I gotta find out really what's the real concern. So what do I first have to do? I have to do what? Get them to let their guard down. Remember we talk about always be disarming. I have to disarm them where they open up and tell me the truth. See what I'm doing here, okay? Now, let's say now I could, if we're right on the conversation, if I'm in person or if I'm on the phone or I'm on the doorstep or, let's say, I'm virtual on Zoom and they say this, I don't need to say, hey, I got your message, don't worry about it. What I would say is like, yeah, don't worry about it. You can always get back to me down the road. And then I'm going to go into this. Now, let's say if I get an email that says this, I'm first going to call them first. Because if I just emailed them this response, not going to be as powerful because then you have to go back through several email exchanges. You can't really hear their tonality. There's things you don't have the same advantage. So I want to call them first. Now, if for some reason I call 2-3 times and I can't get a hold of them, yes, I can send some type of email. But I'm going to call at least a couple of times over 2-3 days and that type of thing. So let's say they answer the phone, that first call. Hey, yeah, John, hey, I got your message and listen, don't worry about it. You guys can always get back to me, 6 months, a year, a couple years down the road. Now, can I ask you something before we jump off the phone? Now, let's say if they said that in person, yeah, that's not a problem at all. You can always get back to me, 6 months, a year or two down the road. Now, can I ask you something before I head out? If I'm at the house, or if I'm in their office, like if I'm selling to a company, or let's say if I'm on Zoom, yeah, that's not a problem. And listen, you can always get back to me 6 months, a year, a couple years down the road. Now, why do I do that first? Because I'm getting their guard down. So when they think I'm about to leave, they don't feel the sales pressure because they think I'm about to leave. Okay, but I know that I have to help them. Okay, remember, selling something you do to them or selling something you do for them. It's for them, not to them. Okay, then I'm going to say, can I ask you something before we hop off? Now notice my tone. Notice my tone shifts down into what? Kind of a concerned tone. A tone that shows empathy, shows them that I might know something that's somewhat important about this. John, can I ask you something before we hop off Zoom? John, can I ask you something before I head out? Okay, see, remember, I'm getting the guard down. They're not going to say, no, you cannot. They're going to say, sure, yeah, what's on your mind? Because the pressure's down, the guard's down. Then I'm going to say this, okay? Now, remember, I'm going to say this in a concerned tone, a tone that shows empathy, okay? Yeah, I guess how can I communicate to you that you might be making a mistake without you getting upset with me? Notice the verbal pausing there, the verbal pacing. What if I said it like this? Yeah, how can I communicate to you that you might be making a mistake without you getting upset with me? It's just not going to hit. Okay, why? Because you say it too fast. When you ask questions too fast, you give them no time to internalize what you're asking. You give them no time to think deeper about what you're asking. But when I slow down and I pace it out, remember that's verbal pacing, by using verbal pauses, it forces their brain literally to have to hang on to every word where they emotionally have to pay attention. They are starting to connect. Now notice I'm using a concerned tone. If you use a curious tone here, that's not going to work. You'd be like, hey, how can I communicate to you that you might be making a mistake without you getting upset with me, John? It's not going to hit home because this tone has to sound serious, like you're concerned for them. You're concerned for the consequences of what's going to happen if they don't change. Okay, that's the key there. They have to feel that you're showing empathy, which you should show empathy because their problems are not going to get solved, right? Yeah, how can I... Now notice how I'm it's almost like you're acting it out, because if you just like have it rehearsed there, it's going to sound like it's a scripted question. So when you act it out, now pay attention to my tonality, my facial expressions, my body language. Yeah, how can I, now even if I'm on the phone, am I still going to do this? Yes, because your facial expressions, your body language affects your what? Your voice, your tone. Yeah, how can I communicate to you that you might be making a mistake without you getting upset with me? Now notice, where did I put my hand on my chest? I put my hand on my chest. That is a non-verbal sign that shows what? That you're genuinely concerned, which you should be. If you've ever seen me do that at an event, when we're talking about, getting into our training programs, when I do this, do you know why I'm doing it? Because I'm genuinely concerned for the audience if they don't change their sales skills, if they don't commit to mastery, if they don't get into our training programs, because I know if they don't, what did Einstein say the definition of insanity was? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a what? A different result. So I know if I can't help them see that I'm doing this for them, not to them, that they will never change their situation.